Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, I want to give a shout out to the 80s slasher librarian. He actually provided one of the stories that was an experience that happened to him in a previous episode. He told me about his YouTube channel and I'd like to share it with all of you. Basically, he owns every Jason, Freddy, Michael, Chucky, and every other slasher novel ever written. Some of them are even out of print and almost impossible to find, and those that you can find are quite expensive to get your hands on. So what he has done is taken the liberty of narrating them, so that you can just listen to them at your leisure. He also adds sound effects, background music, and a whole load of other stuff to spice up the story. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'll leave a link in the description for you to check it out. I hope you enjoy. But with that being said, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. To preface, this happened around 3 years ago, and then 1 year ago. I was 16 at the time, and religious. I'm currently hitting 20 and I'm still semi-religious, and still completely unsure of what the hell happened. Anyway, every year, the church I attended held camps over the summer and winter months. One for children and one for high school-aged kids, of which I fell into the latter category. The camp is held in Arrow Bear Mountain area of Southern California, close to Big Bear, so we're really not that far from the nearest city. The first few days and nights are completely uneventful. We had a great time being kids and hanging out with friends in the mountains. But the last 2 days is where things got intense. The first event happened when the camp counselor of our group, who was in a particular grade in high school, and I was going into junior year as I graduated early, says that we should all go out for a Bible study at night. So it sounds like fun. We gear up for a small hike and set out at around 10 PM. We go for a while, and as we near the spot where we were all to settle down, we hear some noises consistent with medium-sized branches falling into the forest. Now, branches fall all the time, but they seemed really frequent. I didn't really pay any attention to it, but after what happened next, it might be relevant. We sit down on a large rock, my back towards the forest. The group was about 15 kids and one adult counselor. About 3/4 of the way into the study, my friend and I hear noises from behind us. Large, cracking noises. It sounded like someone or something was throwing big rocks into trees. Weird, but maybe it's just one of the group. Then the noises grew louder, and everyone heard it. And then nothing. The group finishes its study and begins to pray. I hear a soft rustling noise behind me once more, but nothing too strange for the woods, until the hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. This intense feeling of dread and fear came over me. I couldn't move, and I wanted to scream, but I didn't know why. Finally, I managed to turn around very slowly, and what I saw changed me forever. There I saw a creature. At first, all I saw were 2 red floating orbs, divided by uneven geometric shapes like an insect. And in those eyes, I saw pure and horrifying hatred. I knew that whatever this thing was, it wanted me dead. The creature was darker than the already pitch-black woods behind me, but slowly its edges became more visible, like a red film came over it, and I knew it wanted me to see it. It had the basic anatomy of a canine, but its head was deformed and disgusting. There were open sores and clumps of fur missing. I couldn't move, except for to nudge my friend. He, far less religious than I, just screamed, "What the hell?" in the middle of group prayer. This creature laughed at us, and with one backwards movement was gone. But I knew he was close by. How? I don't know. Fast forward to departure day. My friend and I still have no idea about what it was, and the priest at camp didn't want to jump to any conclusions, since nobody but my friend and I actually saw it. He didn't know what to think. As we boarded the bus and sat down, I felt watched. I looked back in the general direction of the vent, and I know that it was letting me know it was there, like a goodbye kind of thing. And then, it was gone. 2 years later, this being last year, I see it again. I have been going every year since, and was even a counselor at this point. It was at the high school camp where I was part of the staff at the same location. Again, the second to last day we're there, it happened. We were on the main grounds about a mile away from the first encounter. I'm sitting by the fireplace, talking to a cute staff member and just chilling, when I get the original feeling again. Dread. She must have felt it too, because she bolted upright and started praying, partially in tongues. Basically, for those unfamiliar with the term, it's when one who is engaged in speaking for spiritual reasons begins speaking in an entirely, sometimes unintelligible language, often seen as a gift by some Christian denominations. I look into the dark forest down the hill, and there he is again, under a light post, and in my mind I hear, "Hate, hate, why can't you die?" The creature was stomping his front paws and trembling with rage. At this point, I'm flipping out. I don't know what the hell is going on or why this is happening, and I begin to question my sanity. This can't be real, can it? The girl I was with grabs my arm and holds me close. The being I saw before howls a disgusting guttural noise and bolts up a hill, and I lose sight. I look at her and I ask her if she saw it too. She said, "No, I just felt like I had to start praying, but I didn't see anything." She paused for a second and said that she heard a name, but she didn't really hear it. But it was like a sixth sense. Hatred and rage. Well, that makes sense. Fast forward one more to the last night, and the girl and I have gotten close. We're friends, but we also have a bit of a spark between us. We're sitting at the soccer field holding hands and just relaxing after a physically exhausting day of sports and hiking. The camp is a great place, not just for kids. It's tons of fun, but I digress. The sun has long set, and we're looking at the stars, googling constellations and astronomical stuff on our phone. And then I start crying. At once, I felt depressed and hopeless, and I wanted to cry until I couldn't anymore. I forced myself to look around, and I saw a very disheartening sight. Hatred was back, and he brought a friend. This thing was even more horrid than the first one. It was physically larger than the first creature, but its head looked to be slapped on there, like the original head was ripped off and replaced with this one, akin to a bug, but even creepier, was at the point of the neck where it looked like it was ripped off. There were tentacles, not like octopus or anything. It's indescribable. There's nothing I can link them to. All I hear is, yes, over and over, and I knew it was the second creature. The girl I was with is dead still, and I know she sees it. She starts whispering a prayer. We need to go. Oh my God, we need to leave. And she says to me, his name is Sorrow and Despair. Hatred, the first creature, bolts off, while Sorrow just calmly walks away, taking his sweet time. As he left, I slowly regained my emotions and made a beeline to the pastor's cabin. At this point, he believes me and thinks it was probably a demon. My friend who was with me in the first encounter has turned to drugs, and his whereabouts are unknown, though he's definitely close to home. One of my friends will see him around, and he looks decently fed and clean. I don't really think it was because of this incident. And the girl mentioned, while we never dated, she still remains a good friend. She usually refuses to talk about it as it freaks her out, but remember it, she does. I don't know what happened, and you may not believe me, but I give you my word, this is true. All of it. Was it a ghost? A demon? I don't know. I didn't believe in either until now. I honestly have no clue. Part of me says I'm crazy, and the other part of me thinks I should just forget about it all. But I just needed to tell someone. I'm a former counselor and camper at a camp in the northeastern United States. I would like to start off my story by stating that these things are not only my accounts of things, but other campers and counselors. So I'll begin with some history. The camp started in the 30s, but the land is much older, back to pre-colonization, aka Indian land, from what I've heard. There was at least 2 battles fought on the land, one with Indian wars and the other Indian versus colonists. Now, we'll go into some stuff I have personally experienced, and I can say that my word is true, but you can't always trust the people on the internet. Anyway, the first few experiences are minor, the occasional shadow on overnights, but as I've been there longer, I've noticed more. The main thing that me and the other counselors and even campers have mentioned is drumming late at night. Probably the scariest thing to happen to me is the other counselors and campers went to make a final bathroom stop and get their teeth brushed. I got elected to stay back and make sure no coyotes or raccoons were trying to take the few uneaten hot dogs sitting out. I was alone. I was casually sitting on the bench when I heard what I can only describe as a rushing presence, like something was rushing around me, and I heard leaves crinkling in patterns that no animal could make. Some of the other counselors have had stuff happen in the log cabin or mess hall. One of the campers cut himself, and a counselor, Jack, was giving first aid and was casually making conversation to stop him worrying about the blood, and he just mentions a man in a plaid shirt in the back of the room. Jack sees this and tells him there's nobody there, and the camper replies, "Yeah, I know you can't see him. He doesn't want you to see him." Jack quit later that week. One of the older staff has a logbook of things people have seen, and sadly, he quit and took the book before I could read it, but a picture left at his station had the camp's fire circle with a red orb above it. But almost everyone who has worked there has had one experience or another. I can confirm it is indeed Indian land, because people, including me, have found arrowheads on the ground, but other than that, It's just mainly rumors that circulated, like a hunter haunting one of the cabins with his dog. And apparently, someone in the 30s got into the lake on a foggy night and drowned. Not sure if that one's true though. Either way, it is a very creepy place. I was a Girl Scout for many years. During the summer camp, the counselors would often do this thing called the 12 hours, where they'd basically send you alone into the woods with a pack of supplies, some tarps and a rope, and you'd have to make your own shelter and fire and stay overnight in the woods. This was an activity only reserved for the older scouts, of course. So upon being given a spot to set up camp, I made a makeshift shelter in between two pine trees. It looked pretty snazzy and everything went well. Then I tried to fall asleep in my shelter, my head resting near the pine trees. I was woken up in the middle of the night to the feeling of something crawling on my face. I woke up with a jolt as a daddy long-legged spider crawled off me and into the pine trees. I've no idea why I did this, but young 12-year-old me thought, I'm gonna see where that thing's going. I shined my flashlight at the tree, and that night I learned something very significant. Daddy longlegs live in pine trees. The tree my head was resting on was covered in hundreds upon hundreds of them. All of those spiders. The two trees I used to build my shelter were practically a mating ground. I refused to build my shelter near pine trees after that. This story happened in the late 90s. I was around 11 or so. At the time, I was a member of the Boy/Girl Scouts. In Germany, Boy and Girl Scouts are not separated from each other, so I spent a lot of my childhood in the forest. We camped in the local woods quite a lot and often told each other other creepy stories right before bedtime. Of course, we always claimed our stories to be true and such, and from an early age you'll believe nearly everything. These stories evolved over the years, and one of them, which started with a simple, "There's a creepy homeless man living in the woods," became worse and worse, and ended up being something like, "There's a creepy homeless man living in the woods. He catches children and eats them." One of them even claimed he knew exactly where this guy lived, and after a small argument, we decided to look for ourselves. So we waited until the adults were asleep and slipped out of our tent. We knew we were not allowed to, and this increased our excitement even more. The best part of it, girls like to hold hands, and when they're scared, in a pitch-black forest with only 2 flashlights and no one else around, it just took about a minute until the first one grabbed my arm. We walked through the woods for at least 40 minutes, and then saw it. A big blue tent covered in leaves, with wood piles around it. It looked old and rotten, and we saw bottles and trash lying around. Every single one of us was scared to death. One of the girls started crying, and most of us just wanted to go back. But a few boys said that there's no one living in there, and to prove it, they grabbed sticks and rocks and threw them at the tent. At first, nothing happened. But then we heard swearing, and the whole tent was moving. Suddenly a man jumped out. I can remember him quite clearly. Many layers of clothing and long hair. He was furious, yelling, swearing, and all excitement was gone, and we ran as fast as we could. The girls and most of the boys were crying when we finally reached our camp, but we decided to not tell anyone. Back in our tent, we tried to sleep, but none of us could. Some girls were still crying, and we were all scared that the man followed us. It took us nearly the whole night to calm down, but at this point, the night was still quite nice for me. The girl who grabbed my arm earlier came over and crawled into my sleeping bag with me. She was shaking and scared, but I never felt so cozy and comfortable before. It took me nearly 7 years to get another girl this close to me. A few weeks later, my parents talked about the newspaper, and this gave me the chills. The local police arrested a man who lived in the woods for 2 years. He had escaped prison. He broke into nearby houses to get food and money, and this is how he got caught in the end. We never spoke to our parents about it, and they never caught whiff of what we did. So creepy hobo in the woods, maybe you never ate kids, but let's not meet again. I used to work at a Boy Scout summer camp. Every week, I had to take a big group of campers to a secluded spot for their wilderness survival badge, where they had to build a shelter out of sticks and leaves and sleep in it overnight. The spot in question was only about a half-mile from the main camp, but we took them a circuitous route that made it seem really secluded. Anyway, on this one night in 2004, all the campers had made their shelters. We had cooked dinner and were all just sitting around the campfire. It was getting late, maybe 11 or so I sent all the campers to their shelters for the night and started cleaning up the fire. That's when we heard in the distance what sounded like church bells. They were pretty faint, but myself and my fellow staffers could definitely hear them. They went on for about 30 minutes, ringing every 30 seconds or so. We were a little creeped out, as there were no churches or towns within 20 miles of us. After the bell stopped though, the singing started. It was too faint to hear the words, but it sounded like a church music choir, but a lot of people, and a lot more enthusiastic. Also, it was almost midnight at this point. The singing went on for well over an hour, sometimes quieting down until we almost couldn't hear it, sometimes getting so loud we thought it was getting closer. All of the campers were super creeped out, but I lied to them, telling them there was a church service going on in camp and that there was nothing to be scared of. Eventually, at almost 1 a.m, the singing stopped. I found out a few days later that there had been a large KKK rally only a few miles away that night, and that is what we heard. At the elementary school I went to, there was a tradition for 5th and 6th graders to take a long day trip to Baltimore and Pittsburgh. I can't for the life of me remember which grade went into which place, but that's unimportant. The trip would start around 4 in the morning, and we would typically get home around 1 or 2 the following morning. This encounter happened on the way home from one of these trips. We were maybe an hour and a half away from the school. We would be dropped off to our parents and guardians. Anyway, earlier in the night, we'd made a pit stop at a restaurant for dinner. There was a guy that had been eating at the same time as us. I didn't see him myself, but apparently he'd been watching the students very intently for the entire time. From what I was told, he was probably middle-aged or a little younger, and generally he didn't look like a creep, but his behavior proved otherwise. When the group finished eating and started to load back onto the bus, this man finished up his meal and packed up as well. From there, he followed us out of the restaurant parking lot, and for about the next hour down the stretch of highway, he basically played chicken with our bus. He would swerve in and out of the lanes ahead of us at turns, slow down, speed up, and was generally being very creepy and dangerous. Like I said, this happened for about an hour, of him basically circling the bus and making it very difficult and nerve-wracking. I don't know why it took so long, but eventually one of the teachers decided to call the police and report him. At this point, we were on a stretch of highway that was familiar, and we were very close to home. Almost as if the man knew one of the teachers had called the cops, he sped up ahead of us and pulled off the highway to a small building. As we passed by, we watch him get out of his car and head towards the building entrance, all the while staring intently at our passing bus. The place he pulled off at was an adult world. I guess he'd had enough of playing chicken and wanted to choke it instead. My memories of this incident fade in and out. I grew up in Germany, and it must have been 92 or 3. Once a year my class would go on a school trip, and it was during my 2nd or 3rd year, so I must have been about 8 or 9. Enrollment is from age 6 in Germany, but I enrolled at age 7. Our next trip was somewhere in Lower Saxony. I can't remember where. Each room had 4 bunk beds by the doors, and a recreational area at the end of the room. It had large windows and a glass door to open it. Well, as kids do, we joked around and stayed up longer than permitted. It was actually so dark outside that it scared us, so we kept the curtains shut. A classmate of mine played a daring game, hiding behind the curtains and tearing them open. Dennis decided to run outside and frighten the others next door, which he did. The next thing I remember is Dennis back in our room, and we saw something moving outside. We start to panic and told our teacher. She told us to calm down, closed the curtains, and left. Dennis was curious and found it extremely funny to run outside again. The next thing I remember is me standing outside because I was worried about him. Some guy picked him up and vanished into the darkness. I couldn't see a thing, so I called his name, and a few moments later he appeared before me laughing. He told me to try out this fun game, to be carried by this guy. Next memory, Dennis panicked, and I was in the arms of this man. He ran away with me, and the hostel lights started to seem more distant. I struggled for him to let me go, because he was pressing my chest so tightly. He told me that it was fun and that I shouldn't worry. As I continued to fight and yelled for help, he then panicked and strangled me until I lost my breath. For some reason I was able to grab his hand and pull it away from my neck. "Why are you so strong?" he said, and I'll never forget those words. The next memory I have is of being free, kicking him in the leg and running away. I returned and other things happened. My maths teacher caught that guy and another teacher spoke to me about something. I'm absolutely certain that they told the guy to leave. The next morning the police arrived with this boy, who was in his teens or early 20s, to apologize to me, because he had caused some trouble in the area the night before. I still remember his eyes widen as he saw me. My teachers called me a liar for some reason, and that I shouldn't tell my parents. That's all I remember. I always believed it was a figment of my imagination. The funny thing is, I can't have anything tight around my neck. For example, ties stress me out. When I get anxiety attacks, my chest and throat tighten only. I guess it's some form of confirmation to me that those memories are true. This happened when I was still in preschool. When I was little, I went to this Baptist church-run preschool. I seriously hated going there because I'm pretty sure the principal hated my guts, but that's another story. They were pretty close to a very nice park, so they would take us there on field trips every once in a while. When we were on these trips, we were not allowed to leave the fenced-in playground at the park, because it'd be too much work to actually watch us instead of letting us run wild. The park was composed of about 3 playgrounds, but only one of them had fencing. Since it was a public park, we couldn't be the only people in the fenced-in area. Most of the time it was homeschool kids, other preschools and the occasional family taking their kid to the park while we were on our break. Every now and then, there'd be an after-school program, or a man reading the newspaper, or a confused guy who'd mistaken the fenced-in area for a dog park. Then, there was the ferret guy. I'm not very sure how Ferret Guy got on the playground, or why he wanted to be on the playground. All I know is that he had a live ferret, and that he was keeping it in his jacket, and he looked pretty rough. Now, since we were bored kids, and Ferret Guy had pretty adorable small animals hidden in his jacket, we all sort of swarmed to him to get a good look at the adorable creature. Now here's where it gets weird. We started asking why Ferret Guy was carrying his pet ferret around with him, to which he replied that he and the ferret actually worked at the playground. Apparently, what the job involved was sending the ferret down slides to look for loose bolts and investigating the playground equipment for electrical wires. This struck me as a little weird, but I didn't really get to ask questions about it, because after an hour of ignoring us, the daycare workers suddenly noticed that all the kids were talking to a crazy homeless guy with a ferret. He gave them pretty much the same story, which led them to basically saying, "Okay, let's just let creepy ferret guy get back to work." Not entirely sure what happened to Ferret Hobo, but I'm pretty sure he was off his meds, but he was gone by the time we left. Who knows if that situation would have gone south? And what would have happened if they hadn't have noticed sooner? I've barely spoken about this since it happened 2 years ago. I was 16 and on an excursion to a small town in Zambia for 2 weeks. I'm from Ireland, and I was with 9 other students. The 2 weeks entailed painting a primary school, showing disabled kids how to work, and meeting locals and visiting their villages. It was great and unforgettable, and something I'll treasure for the rest of my life. One of the days, we visited a coffee farm. It was located in a beautiful location, up upon high hills. We were getting a tour and exploring when the owner of the coffee farm, a European man, comes to meet us. I'm purposely being vague in order to conceal his identity. He invites us back into his house. We all get into our cars and drive. I can't describe it to you. His lane we drove took about 30 minutes. It was surrounded by water and was beautiful. It looked like paradise. When we reached his house, right away it was weird. He kept all the dark-skinned people outside, the ones who worked for him and our driver, who should have been considered guests. All but one maid he joked about being his second wife, laughing and wrapping his arm around her when she looked more than uncomfortable. And he gave us a quick tour of his mansion before he brought us into his living room. I remember it vividly. I sat on the couch directly opposite the fireplace. My girlfriend was on this trip too, and she was sitting next to me. He told her to move, and he came and sat next to me. He started sharing stories about his life here in Zambia and boasting about his wealth and whatnot. Every time he spoke, he would gesticulate, and his hand would brush against my breast. The first time I thought it was a mistake, but a few minutes passed and it kept happening, and his hand would graze my thigh. His maid brought in tea, and he asked who the youngest on the trip was. It was me. He instructed me to pour tea out for everyone. I had to get on my knees and pour tea out, and I did it, and once that was done he continued until we left. I think everyone noticed it, but no one said or acknowledged it, and that he was humiliating me. He was touching me and getting away with it in front of my girlfriend, peers, and teachers. My girlfriend kept mouthing for me to move away, but I didn't want to bring further attention to it. I felt frozen in place, I suppose. So that was it. We drove back, and I felt disgusting and ashamed, knowing that everyone saw it. Writing this, I looked him up out of curiosity, and seeing his face made me more anxious than I thought it would. I haven't really let myself think about it until now. Luckily, I'll never have to meet him again. First, some background. I'm a 22-year-old college senior, about to graduate and start medical school in the fall. This happened when I was in elementary school, so over a decade ago. Over the summer, way back then, my mum sent me to YMCA summer camp. I enjoyed going in every day and hanging out with all my friends from school who also went to the camp, but I especially loved one of the counselors, Mike. Mike was always sitting in the same spot when I got dropped off in the morning, and he would see me walk in and put a huge smile on his face. He would always sit there and play cards or some other board game in the morning, while all of the kids were arriving. Once the day's scheduled activities started, Mike would always be the counselor in charge of my group. He would always just be close to me. As a kid, I didn't know that was weird. I really liked him, as I said, and I thought he was a really cool guy as an 8-year-old. Fast forward a few years. My mum, my younger sister and I were out at a skate park in the area, about a half hour from where we lived. We had gone down there to hang out for the day. We have a great time on the playground, walk around the trails and stuff, and then we head back to the car. When we arrived back, my mum was getting my sister all strapped in and ready for the ride home, and I was getting situated in the back seat of the car. Now our car was in the parking lot, and there weren't really a ton of people at the park that day. The lot was pretty much empty. So when I noticed that there was a car parked right next to our car, I thought, that's weird. But again, I was a kid and didn't really think anything of it. Why would this car park literally right next to us when I can see 50 empty spots from right here? Anyway, my mum is getting my sister and I'm all ready for the trip back home. Suddenly, the driver door of the other car opens and out pops Mike. My mum recognized him, so she said hi and continues back to what she was doing. Mike says, "Do you mind if I take a couple of pictures of the kids? He's gotten so grown and I want to remember this." My mum goes, "No, you're not going to do that," and shuts the driver's door and locks the car and we leave. As we're leaving, I can see Mike trying to take a photo through the window of the car. A few years later, when I was a bit older, my mum told me a few more details about Mike. My mum at the time was pretty high up in a company that pairs kids with adult mentors. Adults would be applied to be paired with kids, so my mum starts telling me about how one day when they were going through the applications to be a mentor, Mike's name popped up. Apparently someone else had interviewed Mike and recommended him for approval into our system. My mum, on the other hand, essentially vetoed it, because she obviously had known Mike from these other experiences, and she got a weird vibe from him and thought something was off. So finally we're watching the news at dinner one day a bit later. They start sharing a story about a man who was arrested, and they show a mugshot of Mike. The charge? Thousands of images. Thousands of indecent images of underage children that both he had made and was in possession of. He was actually caught by Border Patrol as he was acting weird when he was trying to cross into Canada, and they decided to search his car, and they found a bunch of it on his computer. They alerted the US authorities, who then searched his house, and they found tons more. I'm 100% confident that he wanted to add me to the collection. If it's not for my mum having a great mother's instinct and the Canada-US border, it might have happened. Summer camp counselor Mike, please, let's never meet again. In my graduation year of high school, the class went to a trip to a beach town. I was always a loner in school, and the only friends I had in school didn't go to this trip. I never really interacted much with my classmates. At this point in the trip, we are about 21 people, and we're left in a famous seaside street filled with bars and restaurants. We were allowed to be free and have fun and eat and drink whatever we wanted. It was nighttime, and we could do as we pleased in that street until midnight. This is not the US, by the way, and I'm not even sure if this is allowed in the US. My classmates started grouping up and choosing places to eat and drink, and despair took over me, as I hated grouping up. As always, I was alone, and decided to wander around to find a place to have dinner alone. Looking at the restaurants, I found a really cute one that served artisanal pasta, and it was empty. An old man was almost begging for people to come and take a look. I was such a good guy before this trip that I couldn't say no to eating there, and to make the old guy and the owner happy. As I ate my tagliatelle with octopus, which is the worst dish I've ever had, a hobo sat at the floor by me and started chatting. I was such a good guy that I thought, oh, poor hobo, I don't need to pretend that he's invisible, he's a person just like me, and I chatted back. He asked if the food was good, and when the owner saw the hobo, they came right away yelling at him to leave, and I was like, no, it's fine, we're chatting, and they gave up. The hobo said he was hungry, and if I could buy him food. I said yes. He told me he had a restaurant that he really liked, and he would like food from there. I offered him money, and he denied it, and said he couldn't buy the food himself because the people there don't like him. I was such a nice guy that I said, sure, let me finish here and I'll go buy it for you. He waited patiently, and when I was done he guided me there. We passed by the most populous part of the street, where some of the others were, and a classmate, that I should allow myself to call a friend now, asked where I was going with the hobo. I said I was going to buy him food, and that it was okay. She didn't appear to accept it, but I proceeded following the hobo. It was getting further away. The street was becoming darker, and with less restaurants. I told the hobo, are you sure it's around here? There doesn't appear to be any restaurants anymore. He assured me it was just round the corner. Just as we exchanged these words, I heard someone screaming my name in the distance. It was that friend. Michael, what are you doing there? Come back here right away. She appeared really distressed. Still clueless, I thought she also needed my help or had something to tell me. I told the hobo that my friend was calling and that I needed to go over there. But we're almost arriving. I have to go. And I ran to her. Are you crazy? What, are you out of your mind? I've been asking around and that hobo is a super dangerous criminal around here. Come right back with me. And I was saved by that friend from what could have been a horrible end to me or worse. From that day, I learned a valuable lesson. Be an arse. I'm not a good guy for everyone anymore. I pretend hobos don't exist, and I don't help random people around. From that day, I learned a valuable lesson. Basically, don't be naive, and don't be so nice to people. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's topic. Really some creepy stories there. If you did, don't forget to drop a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe and hit the bell icon if you're new and haven't done so already, as it really does help me out. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow for even more scary stories. If there's a story that has happened to you that you would like to share, You can find all the information to send it to me in the description. It's my email address or my Reddit. With that being said though, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.